Hello, Bill Johnson here with Gus the Groovy Bus and another Prevo maintenance moment. Today we're going to cover a variety of topics related to the inverters and the automatic generator start and the batteries. It's a very confusing topic, and certainly anything I convey here is specific to my coach. Please make sure you read your manuals closely and make sure that it applies. You can see on this country coach we have a lot of amp hours of capacity. We have 8 Lifeline batteries, 8D batteries, with over 2,000 amp hours of capacity in those batteries. We have 2 Magnum inverters. These were installed by the Inverter Service Center in White House, Tennessee. Before I bought the bus, they were installed in the first quarter of 20. And you can see the batteries were installed at the same time. So 2 new inverters. I think they did a very good job installing these inverters with new remotes inside the bus and a new automatic generator starter circuit, which would start the generator based on voltage. And you could also have a remote input to have it start based on inside temperature of the bus or even to a thermostat. And you can see they mounted the automatic generator start here inside the generator bay. So that was great. I'm glad they did that. A lot of these old buses have the Gen Con, I think it's a 9232 board, which really, I guess it works, but it's a little outdated. And I was having trouble with mine, so maybe that's why they went ahead and installed that. And you can see in a country coach, the generator control board is back here on the other side of the generator. You can see the Gen Con board there. It had not been disabled, and I could not start the generator from inside the coach. When I started, it would start and stop. So there's something wrong with that Gen Con board related to its ability to remotely start and stop the generator from within the bus. So I had an automatic generator start on voltage, but I couldn't work the generator, start it and stop it from inside the coach, because that circuitry still went through the Gen Con board and not through the new Magnum automatic generator start. So I wanted to fix that. I wanted to get everything going through the new Magnum so that my inside switches would work. And I'm going to explain how I did that. I'm going to explain some of the setups that I've gone through on the Magnum remote that's inside the bus. I have 2 of those since there are 2 inverters. So quite a lot to cover. Again, it's very specific to a country coach, but some of what I communicate will apply to any coach with the Gen Con, the older Gen Con automatic generator start system. So the first thing I wanted to do was try to disable it. I found a schematic of the Gen Con system, and you'll see here power comes in down through the master disconnect and provides power to the board here, also provides power through an auxiliary relay here. So to totally kill the board, you need to pull this connector. Actually, I found this relay and pulled the connector off here. I pulled the ground connector off here. So the relay is not energized, it's open, and the board is powered down. This power here is used for the start circuitry from inside the coach and the automatic start circuitry. So I've pulled those 2 wires out to disable the board. Again, that's E3 on the board, connects to this auxiliary relay. And then just to be safe, I pulled the wire off the crank terminal. And I also removed this, what they call brownout connector. This Radio Shack power supply was all about starting on a brownout. So I've pulled all that out. I also pulled wire E8 and E10 off. E8 is the remote, is the wire that comes from inside the coach. There's multiple switches in the coach that will enable E8 with 12 volts when I want to remote start it. E10 is the auto start function, which I don't need on this one anymore because I have it on the other, so I pulled it off. What's important is this E8 wire. When I press my remote start switch inside the coach, and I have two of them, one up front above the driver, you see the switches up there, and one in the back. When you push that button for these Gen Cons, it will enable 12 volts on this E8 terminal. So that is a switching from 0 to 12 volts depending on whether you push the button to start the generator or push it again to stop the generator. So that's the key to interfacing with the new auto start. There's actually a pigtail that you can buy. Let me find it here. That allows you to take that 12 volt switching circuit and connect it to this Magnum auto start. It's an MEPT1 instruction sheet. MEPT1, it's about $20. What that does is I can plug that 12 volts that switches between 12 and 0, 12 to start, 0 to stop, into the side of this auto start, this Magnum auto start. You can see it right here, the purple. That's your remote. The other one, the network, communicates with the inverters. So this wire, I simply ran it back over again to the other side where you have the Gen Con board. I pulled those terminals off and connected that wire to that switching 12 volts, and voila. Now my internal switches on the coach work to start and stop the generator. Let me try to show you. I have to crawl back in here, so this isn't the easiest to do, but I'll do the best I can. So you can see that this wire here used to be plugged in down there. That is the switching wire. That white wire comes out and goes up over to there. These are the wires I talked about pulling off the relay to kill the board, as well as that crank wire. And this is the auto start monitor, what they called it. And I don't need that anymore since it's all on that other board. So if you have a country coach and you put the Magnum in and you want to use your internal switches, all you need to do is get this wire 159 or whatever wire it is on your coach off of that terminal, and you can then connect it to that Magnum generator start to that pigtail, and your inside switches will work, and you won't have to run a new switch to the bus. So again, it's MEPT1, and is this E8 wire that you need to get access to that switches between 0 and 12 volts. And you connect it to the MEPT1 to disable this Gen Con, pull these wires off, pull that crank wire off, pull this brownout out of there, pull E10 off just for good measure. And now you have a new state-of-the-art auto generator start capability using your existing switches in the coach with new Lifeline batteries, new Magnum inverters, and then I'm going to walk you through how we configure the system through those remote panels at the top of the coach, and we'll do that in just a moment. Okay, let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the settings on the standard remote control. There's a section 3.0 for the setup. The first setting is shore power. Typically, I have this set on 30 amps, the default setting. However, you'll notice down here, unless you have the hybrid series, and I think I would probably buy those if I was going to do this again, because it has some load support features. The shore max setting limits the current to the battery. So connected to a 50 amp service, I'd have it set on 30. If I'm on a 30 amp service, I typically dial it back to about 5. So I'm only using 5 amps for the battery, and that gives me the 25 amps for other loads. So that's an important setting that could change based on how you're connected to shore power. The automatic generator start menu we'll talk about here in a minute. The meter menu is typically the page you stay on normally, and there's several different things you can see in terms of status of the inverter battery system. Search watts, I leave it turned off. That's simply a way that if you don't have many loads in your bus, it'll search for those and only turn on the inverters when it finds them. Supposedly it saves battery. There's a low battery cutout, so I have mine set at 11. So if the batteries drop below 11 volts, it'll turn off the inverters. The absorption time is a very important setting. We need to talk about that for just a moment. So on the page here, you'll see that depending on the amp hour capability of your batteries, it tells you the absorption minutes that you need to configure. In my case, we have 8 of the 8D batteries, and that's about 2,000 amp hours. So I will set mine to 330 minutes. And there's a note down here. You'll see 8D batteries are typically 250 amp hours. And that's indeed what those lifelines are. So you take 8 of those times 250, you get 2,000 amp hours. And there's how you can tell how to set your absorption time. The battery type, there's different options here. Lifeline batteries are AGM1 settings. And you'll see there's also a battery to charge voltage. So for AG1, and you'll see the footnote here, that's for Lifeline, 12 volt. The absorption voltage is 14.3. So it gives you the voltages that it'll charge at. So AGM1 is what you want if you have 8D Lifeline batteries. And this is some of the charging cycle. There's a charge rate. I have mine set at 100% since there's enough battery to be able to take the full 120 amps. But again, if you don't have that many batteries, you may have to change that. I think those are the major items. Now let's go back to section 7 and talk about the automatic generator start. So here is section 7. It talks about runtime. So that's how long the generator will run if it auto starts. And if it has met its parameters, it'll shut down after that number of hours. And you'll see again, based on your amp hours, it gives a recommended setting of 5.5. I have mine actually a little bit less than that. The start temperature, that's going to be set to external input because I connected that pigtail with that 0 and 12 volt wire. So this is how you connect that PT1 adapter, by selecting external. I think those are the main settings. So let's go into the bus. We'll page through some of these menus and show you what I have. A couple of things I did learn is if you have the generator set to auto start and you manually start your generator, it will turn the auto start off and you will have to turn it back on. I also found out that if you try to start the generator when you still have AC connected to the bus, it will not start remotely with AC connected to the bus. I assume that's for safety purposes, but those are a couple of things I learned in playing with the different settings. Now with the Country Coach, you'll see you have some generator buttons: generator on, boost, generator automatic mode, and generator start stop. The start stop button is what I wired into, or what operates that 0 and 12 volt wire that we connected up. The automatic mode is disabled. That's the wire I pulled off. because that's now controlled by these remote panels. So I can start my generator using the generator start-stop, and all of the settings in terms of automatic start and stop are here on these panels. And you'll notice I'm not connected to shore power at the moment, but you'll see for shore power, I'm set at 30 amps. Now you can use this and scroll through other options, but 30 is where I like to be, assuming I'm on a 50 amp service. Automatic generator, so you push the button. It's off right now because I manually started the generator earlier to change the oil. So I would go to enable. Now it's enabled. Status, it's ready. Run time. If it starts automatically, it'll run for a minimum of 3 hours and then check to see if the reason for starting has been satisfied. This is where you have to select external input because of that pigtail. Start volts, I have it 11.5. Now it's important to realize 11.5 may seem low, but this is load volts. So load volts will always be less than just unloaded volts. So 11.5 makes sense for a loaded battery. If you take the load off, it would jump up to 12 point something. That's the time. And you can set quiet time, so the generator won't automatically start during certain times. Okay, then you got your meter button that just shows the status. You have a setup button. So search watts, we talked about earlier. I have it turned off simply because I want it to always be inverting. Unless you have very light loads in your bus, it doesn't make sense to turn that on. Low battery cutout at 11. So that's the voltage of the loaded. If the loads in the battery take the voltage down to 11 volts, it will turn off the inverters to protect your batteries. Absorption time, 5.5. That's what we talked about earlier, the 330 minutes. Battery type, these are Lifeline 8D, so it's AGM1. And that battery type impacts the way in which it charges. So you definitely want to make sure you have the right setting. Charge rate's 100%. I have enough batteries to be able to absorb 120 amps. And then there's some other, power up always is another important one. I have it selected to no. What that means is if you lose voltage to the inverters and they power up again, they will stay off. That way you don't accidentally, if somebody's working on the system, power it up and hurt them. Okay, so that's set up, and then there's a tech menu as well. It gives you various options and information. So that's what you have. And then go back to meter. Okay. One other note is when you do start the generator remotely using the on-off switch, it pauses slightly before it starts. And after you turn off when you want it to shut down, it will run for 2 minutes before it actually does shut down, unless you go to the remote and select disable. So that's the AGS system and how I've wired it into this country coach. Hopefully it'll help somebody. Again, for your bus or your setup, go through this manual very carefully and make sure you have the correct settings because they're all very important. And make a note of the settings you have in case you ever lose them and need to set it up again. I certainly hope this helps somebody, and thanks for watching.